So the first thing I think to simplify it is you got to know what your priorities are to develop a good hurdler and as a hurdle coach. And one is you got to have that prerequisite speed. A lot of people just put their slower guys that can't make the 100 in the 110s and try to have them learn that, which is why I was a hurdler. You know, I wasn't going to beat somebody in the 100, so I wanted those barriers to help me out. But they are sprinters, whether they're fast or slow. You want to make sure you treat them as such, and you don't want to take away from their sprint training. And you also have to realize that hurdle training is a speed day. We talk a lot about, with my dad and Coach Lakatis, talk a lot about breaking down your days into max velocity days, lactate days, X factor days, things like that. And a lot of people ask me, like, when should we hurdle? You know, we don't want to take away from those speed days, and I agree, but at the same time, you got to be careful with having too many hurdles and sprint days in the same week. So we'll get into that. The second most important thing to me in hurdles is steps. So if you're not 8-stepping and 3-stepping in the 110s, that should be your whole focus, trying to get down to there. If they're 9-stepping, 5-stepping, try to get them down to 9-stepping and 4-stepping. If they're able to 8-step and 3-step, now you're starting to work on takeoff and landing, and we'll break all that stuff down. And then the stuff that hurdle coaches really like to talk about, I really just talk about as it's just safety, like the trail leg over the hurdle form. It's what makes you look good as a hurdle coach. My best hurdler I ever coached, he was a state record holder. It's always funny because people will look at him hurdling and they'll be like, hey, he has like a lot of form stuff he should fix, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, but there's a lot of things that he can get away with because of other things he does well, and I don't dwell on that. I want to make sure he's fast, his steps are good, and he hits his certain points the correct way. So I think that's like the lowest on my priorities. It's basically, are you able to get through a race safely without hitting hurdles and stuff like that? So it's just hitting proper body positions to ensure safety. So back to the speed priority. Hurdling is a sprint day. And as you know, if you've seen if you've been to other sessions, sprints must be timed with spikes. So we do that. I do it in multiple ways. I use the OnForm app, which is a video app where you can kind of break down frame by frame. It's one word, OnForm. There's a paid version, but I kind of skated by that. There's like a trial version, as long as you don't save the videos, which is good because I don't want like a million hurdle videos because I take like 100 videos a day and it kind of wipes it clean. But what it allows me to do is as you scroll frame by frame, it shows you to the 100th of a second. So on that first movement on takeoff, that's when my clock starts, and then on touchdown, I'll stop it then. So, you know, my best hurdler was like from first movement to touchdown on the first hurdle was 2.50 on like very consistently. And then from touchdown to first hurdle to touchdown to second hurdle, usually like 1.10, and that allows me to monitor how fast they're going and just making sure things are going well. And it, you know, really I think ups the quality of the hurdle rep and the hurdle practice. The other way is you can just wear chips. The hard part with wearing a free lap chip and trying to get a hurdle time is I don't think you can get a great accurate touchdown time. So I usually put it a little bit farther, and you know that'll also teach them to run through the rep as well. But it's just kind of comparing apples and oranges when you were comparing touchdown times and you're doing free lap, which is what I'm going to move to this year. The time's going to be different, but as soon as you start to accumulate that data, you'll be able to have something to compare it to. And then you got to make sure you realize the hurdling is more taxing than sprinting. So that's why I usually will hurdle on a sprint day. So we do a lot of sprint days in the preseason. I try to hold off on hurdling in the preseason as long as I can. So we have our first meet March 1st. I probably won't hurdle until February, and my guys are already begging me to hurdle, which I love. It's awesome. But I think speed is so important in the off season, and I don't want to overly tax them in the off season either, because we know that track season is a very long 5 months, 5.5 months, and hurdling is so taxing. And I always tell the kids, like, you can feel great and you feel like, oh, I can handle it, but if you overdo the sprinting thing, you don't know it until it's too late, right? It's, I can do one more rep, I can do another day. And then, 3 weeks later, it's like I got shin splints or I got a bad hamstring. So to the steps priority, to me, steps are 99% of long hurdle coaching. I'm not going to really break down race to race, but I had a coach in the area who's a very opposite of Feed the Cats, more high volume. He came up to me. He never asked for advice, but he was frustrated with his guy dying at the end of the 300s, and he's like, Coach, how do you get your guys to not die at the end of the 300s? What are you doing to get them in such good shape? I'm like, well, do you train your 300 hurdlers for the 400? He's like, yeah. I'm like, do you think that they need extra stuff to be trained for the 300? He's like, well, no. I'm like, well, then it's not about being in shape in the 300s. They're just losing energy from their steps. They're stuttering and having to restart after every hurdle, and it feels like you just ran a 600 instead of a 300. So it's not about being in shape. It's just about being efficient. And I learned that from one of my hurdlers we'll get into pretty soon, but he basically just didn't like practicing. And so we just made sure his steps were good, and he stayed champ. And then we build our hurdle practices around desired steps. One thing that I don't think non-hurdlers realize when they start coaching hurdles, like if you haven't done it, hurdling in practice feels so much different than it does in a meet. Like you can get pretty high output time-wise in sprints, but like I said, I coached the fastest hurdler in the state. This guy's like a blur. It's like every step is the fastest thing you've ever seen. It's like he's stuttering, but three-stepping. And I would have him do full height, full distance in practice, and it was like he was reaching. He couldn't make it to the hurdle. And I'm like, ugh, I don't like the way this looks. This does not look quality. As Feed the Cats, we're always looking for a quality practice, quality rep, right? So I just started manipulating the distances and the height of the hurdle to make it look like I wanted it to look, right? I'm like, I want my best hurdler that looks great in meet. I want him to look great in practice too. I was a little scared. The hurdlers were a little scared. Like, are you sure I can just practice on a lower height and be ready for a meet at the higher height? I'm like, I think so, But I played it off. I played it like, yeah, for sure.
Alec, would you, if you have a young hurdler per se, and they have not shown the ability to three-step yet, would you ever put them in a race?
In high school boys, I would not. Now, I have done a lot of training with middle school kids, like on the side, and I even train a fourth grader right now. If three-step is not even close, I'm like, yeah, just go ahead and do what you can.
Are you doing anything at height in practice?
So the day before a meet, if we're hurdling, I give them the option. So some of those kids are so anxious about, can I do the competition height? I'm like, all right, just to get ready for a meet, yeah. But yeah, back to the three-stepping thing. If it's a high school boy and you're not able to three-step, I'd rather you work it out in practice before I put you in a meet. But middle school kids, I'm just trying to push them to, if they're five-stepping, I'm trying to push them to four, and we kind of come up with a race plan. Like I trained one middle school girl, and she was five-stepping. We finally got her to four-step inconsistently, and she wasn't sure that she could hold on to it for a whole race. I'm like, okay, well, how about we try to four-step the first hurdle and the second hurdle, and that'll put you kind of at your desired lead leg, and then you can just five-step the rest of the way, and then, we'll come back to it, and we'll continue to work on getting those steps right. So that way they can hurdle, even though they can't three-step. But I'm not afraid to discount distance really far to get kids more confident in their steps as well. And we'll talk about the beginner hurdle progression pretty soon here as well. As far as our technique drills, this is the only drills that I do. I wish that I could come here and give you a whole bunch of drills that'll, fix or teach or be really good or whatever, but every hurdle drill that I was put through as a hurdler, I felt like it detrained certain things while it trained some things. And the big thing is all it did was give me way too much volume. The landing coming off hurdles, even if you're jogging through, the landing is too much pounding for drills. For example, we had a warm-up thing where it was like, my coach did like 6 hurdles this way and then 6 hurdles this way. So it was like 12 hurdles. And we had to do it like 8 times where we were just like jump, land, jump, land, jump, land, jump. And it's like, it's not taxing like it's not like you're out of breath because you're going slow, but like I said, the accumulated pounding, I just totally lost my health. So I hated that. So we do wall drill and fence drill, and this is really all we do. And we can do this every day. And all our focus is that hip mobility. So this is kind of good for anybody to do, really, for the hip mobility. And then the muscle memory of hitting the points that we need to technique-wise.